This is Shane Lynn with MacArthur Museum of Arkansas Military History, and today I'm interviewing a very special guest. Bruce Wesson is a Vietnam veteran. If you've been to the museum in our Vietnam gallery, you've seen his photographs along with Jim Guy Tucker. And I wanted to have him on as an interview because he has some fascinating stories to tell, has a very interesting history. And Bruce, won't you tell us, instead of me giving a big long introduction, won't you tell us about yourself and what you're doing these days?
Okay. Well, I was born in 1943 and grew up with this little storybook television sitcom neighborhood. There were 10 kids. And I was thinking through this last night about significant events in the wars and all of that. And I realized that out of the 10 kids, 8 of us were born during the Second World War. And most of us started school during the Korean War. And then most of us the rest of us graduated from high school or college and went to fight or went to be in the Vietnam War. So war is a kind of an undercurrent in our lives that I didn't ever think about until actually last night when I was thinking about this interview.
Wow.
But we were just a typical storybook bunch of kids that we'd go to the Saturday matinee together and come home and play cowboys or Tarzan or whatever the matinee had been. And we hung together for years and years. We don't contact much. Several of us are gone. But anyway, it's quite the storybook childhood.
And then, so you graduated from Hall High School. You were a classmate of former Governor Jim Guy Tucker.
Right.
And then you got a call from Uncle Sam?
No, actually,
Or did you volunteer?
I went through Army Advanced ROTC at the University of Arkansas. So you have an obligation to go through 1 year of ROTC at the University of Arkansas. But I stayed in, and because at the end of when you graduate, you receive a commission in the Army as a second lieutenant. The reason I did that is because my brother was in Korea and Vietnam was really getting going about that time. And so I asked him about this advanced ROTC thing, and he said, if you have to go, meaning to Vietnam, he said, and you are going to have to go, he said, you need to do this. He said, because it's a lot better to go in as a second lieutenant than it is a private. Yeah. And so that's what motivated me to go ahead and get that commission, and then the rest of the story is built on that.
Well, so how did you end up then going to Vietnam? And tell us, you had a very unique role once you got there. Can you tell us about that?
It didn't start out that way. I went to Officer Signal Basic at Fort Gordon, Georgia, and we learned how to be a signal officer with microwave transmissions and all the other stuff that was state of the art back then, and now it's just antique and kind of shoved in the corner. But I went to Signal Officers Basic, and March 10th is when I began my active duty, and on a March 10th. And so my wife and I were married on June 5th, and I had received my orders to report to Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. And no, actually, I had received my orders to report to Fort Huachuca, Arizona, which was the springboard to Vietnam for signal officers. And one day I just got a very official-looking letter, and it said I'd been reassigned to the 221st Signal Company Pictorial in Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. And so, and I had to report like on June the 9th, and our wedding was scheduled for June the 5th. So we got married and drove in our little VW, pulling a trailer from Little Rock all the way up to the New Jersey shore at Fort Monmouth. And that's where it all started. And we went through a photographic school, and then the unit was, and that's where the story just goes on all the way through continuously until today. So I'll just abbreviate it and say that we packed up all our stuff, put it on trains, and we flew up to Tacoma, Washington. The trains got up there ahead of us, loaded all our stuff on a ship. We got on the ship, and 26 days later, we pulled into Vung Tau, right here, South Vietnam, and we'd come back up through this way, through the Philippines, and crossed to Guam, and then up to Tacoma.
Well, I was just curious, did you have any thoughts about Vietnam at the time, what you might expect, what the news, what you're hearing from the news then? Do you have any going in with any preconceived notions or anything like that?
Well, by that time, we were pretty numb to it. We were, and also we were really busy activating this brand new company, and the company was formed around the concept of of photography teams, which would be a tight-knit group of guys, and there would be a still photographer in there, a couple of motion picture photographers, and a couple of grips, guys that would carry stuff around. Of course, we all ended up carrying stuff around. But that was what the whole idea was.
And this was what year?
This would have been 65.
1965.
No, 66.
66. And then you get there, and you start unloading, and what are your orders? What do they tell you need to do?
Well, we got there, and then we got on a plane, and they flew us to Tan Son Nhut, which was just a short hop from this little dot here up to that little dot there, up to Tan Son Nhut. That's Saigon, and just outside of Saigon is Tan Son Nhut, the huge Air Force base. We got off the plane. They had put all our duffel bags and everything down, and we were assured of transportation back to the company. Now, the company was just a short drive up to just on the other side of this red dot, but it was out in the sticks. But it was a huge base. It was a huge compound known as Long Bend, and that's where our headquarters was, and that's where they took us.
And they told you to do what?
Actually, they told us that we had to build our own, quote, hooches, and those were aluminum buildings, and I don't know what the measurements were, but we had about, it would sleep about 25 guys in beds, not in bunk beds, but in beds. And the guys that went in the first group 6 weeks before literally had to start building the hooches. Right. And they did that for about 6 months until they got the whole company compound built out. But then, right about the time that my squad, my guys, were going to get started on all of that, since we came over in what they call the second packet, I got orders to report to to MACV headquarters at Tan Son Nhut. That's where Westmoreland and all of his cronies were. That was the command center. MACV was Military Assistance Command Vietnam. So that was over the entire theater. So I went down there, and I found out that I had been chosen to be the leader of a new concept for motion picture teams. The backstory was the fact that a colonel had been appointed by the Department of Defense to be the new information officer of the MACV, of the Vietnam theater. And so I had no idea who he was at the time, but I had orders to go down there and connect with him, which I did. Turns out, I had been chosen to be the first team leader of one of the new Department of Defense photographic teams. This gets kind of complicated, but there were 2 Army, 1 Navy, 1 Air Force, and 1 Marine photographic teams allocated. That means they existed only on paper. They activated one Army and one Marine team. And I was chosen to lead the Army team. And it was kind of like, what? You know, I had no idea what that was. The backstory starts that this colonel was chosen to be the information officer of the entire theater as it related to the press and not public relations. The public relations would not have been good. But at any rate, he was over a huge contingent, and his story was that he'd just gotten tired of seeing all of the money that we were pouring into nation building and aid and programs that were helping the people and the orphans and kids and everything. And so he wanted to come up with a solution so that a more positive aspect, the positive aspects of what we were doing over there could be shown. And so we were tasked with doing things like, we did in Saigon, we did the Lausanne School for the Blind that was run by Vietnamese French priests, and it was extremely rewarding to see all of that and interesting to film. And all the way from that to a Philippine barrio festival that was way up north. And we filmed things with the Korean Army, and we filmed things with the Australians, but those were pretty benign things. None of those involved any aspect of combat. And all of my buddies back at the company were going out on combat missions and what have you, and out of some insane notion, I asked Colonel Bankston, that's what his name was, Colonel Bankston, if we could also include combat in our mission, and he said, well, absolutely. And so every once in a while we would go out, between shots, we would go up to the 9th Infantry Division of the 101st or one of the Air Force bases or what have you. And we would film stories up there, and they would take us out in the field or wherever. There wasn't a constant diet of combat stuff. We did some interesting things. I'll tell you about one if you'd like to hear it.
Definitely.
I just happened to look over my shoulder. One of my favorite, can you see this? One of my favorite stories was about the Navy hovercraft concept. The Navy was down there on in the Mekong Delta on water continuously with the Mekong River or all the tributaries or rice paddies or what have you. And it's a very hard area to not only traverse, but to stay on top of, because you had the riverine forces on the swift boats, and which were Navy and were armed, and then you had the 9th Infantry riverine troops that would go out with them or whatever. But so somebody thought that these hovercrafts would be a great way to be able to traverse rice paddies and levees and get back on the river in one continuous flow, and that they would be a great insertion, a combat squad insertion device to put in to put the infantry troops in really quickly and get them out quickly. Well, here you see, I don't know if you can tell here or not, but all these guys here are 9th Infantry Division combat soldiers, and they are literally roped on to that hovercraft with a little piece of clothesline.
Wow.
And their feet here are up on a stretcher. That's really encouraging. And the port right there between them is the firing port for a 30 caliber machine gun. And they drew a blue line on the deck there where the troops are, and they said, when you hear that machine gun going, don't cross that blue line. Wow. But at any rate, it proved to be pretty much a failed concept because we were ambushed about 5 miles north. We'd only been on the river for about an hour, and we were ambushed because the engine on this thing, you can see this huge engine back there, was a turbo, like a helicopter engine, and it was as loud as a helicopter. And they could hear us coming for over a mile. And sure enough, on the first mission out, we were ambushed. And both of those, one of them, that one that we had been in about 6 weeks later had been destroyed by an RPG. And then the other one was going up a tributary and got its skirt hung on a big piece of submerged stump or something, and it ripped off. And so both of them that got introduced there were totaled. And they had built 3 of them for this purpose. The third one never got shipped, and it's over in a military museum in Virginia. So that concept, our report that I turned in was really what tanked that whole mission, because I said that it's loud, it does not carry enough troops to make much of an impact, and the troops are just totally vulnerable to small arms fire. So based on our film, they went ahead and worked it. He did it for about a month, and then both of them had been destroyed anyway.
Right. And your photographs and your film also went back, once it was, I'm sure, went through the censor process, was released to civilian newspapers and nightly news back home. So a lot of your work and your team's work were being shown back home here in the mainland U.S.
That's what all these dots are about. These dots are places that we stayed, and I would say 3/4 of them are places that we filmed stories, all the way up to just below the DMZ. We went over into Cambodia one time to look at the defoliation on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and we filmed a classified story on that. All that's been declassified, so I can talk about it. But at any rate, really some An-Khe, and we were at Pleiku and Dak To and Kontum and Bami Tuit, and it just, these names go on and on and on. They don't make any sense to anybody, but they're just embedded in me and all the people that were over there.
Well, for those who come to the museum and view the gallery here of just some of the photographs, you have many, many photographs, but some of the photographs we have on display here in the gallery shows that you were literally a lot of different places, and you captured a lot of Vietnam while you were there by the photograph.
Yeah, and absolutely. I mean, this is pretty much, these photographs cover pretty much most of Vietnam, north, south, east, and west, just in this small group. But what you brought up, probably the most important part of the story, as far as I was concerned, that I skipped over, was the fact that Colonel Bankson had gotten really tired of seeing all the blood and guts and everything else while he and his family were trying to eat dinner. And that's why they formed us. And so we would film something way out in the boondocks, and we'd get on a helicopter and we would fly over here to, and here it would be Pleiku, and we'd fly over here to An-Khe, and then we would fly down to Quy Nhon or Chu Lai or wherever, where there's a big Air Force base where Pan Am flew into. And we would go to the Pan Am, actually my assistant team leader would go in, and he would get a Pan Am classified bright orange air freight bag, put our film in it, and the write-up that I would do, and lock it, put it on the Pan Am jet, and within 48 hours, it could be processed and edited and distributed to the networks to show on the evening news.
Wow.
And that's what we were all about, is getting the message that MACV wanted us to produce into television, into living rooms.
Well, having been a lot of different places, filming a lot of parts of Vietnam, a lot of different events that were happening, interacting with civilians and troops, Did you have views maybe going in that may have changed as time, did you have any views of Vietnam before that may have changed or stayed the same after?
Well, you know, I was in a blessed state of confusion. And I had so many different overlapping emotions. You know, there's the fear factor of the unknown and everything, and then there's, you know, we had just gotten married to start our life, and that, and then the responsibility of this MACV photo team. And, you know, I was responsible for getting us these places and everything else, and coordinating with various information officers and command centers and everything else to set this up. So, yeah, it was quite a ordeal.
Well, tell us about when it ended, when it was time for you to leave and you left the service, and then what was life like for you after that?
Well, that's really where it all started. As far as where I am now, first of all, I was really blessed by getting to come back when I did, and I wasn't injured, I wasn't hurt, I got hungry a lot, I got a lot of itches and bites and everything else. But I had survived all in one piece, and I was thrilled. Now, I got to get out a month early. My tour was only 11 months, and because I got out of the Army on that day, and so I ended up getting home the end of May. Kathleen and I had been married, and she had been at the University of Arkansas getting her master's degree. And I came home. We stayed home 2 days and got in our little VW and went down to Dallas, and I started looking for a job as a graphic designer. And I got on at a really good design firm where I learned a lot. And a little over a year later, that was Woodstock occurred during that time, to give you a little time window. I came back to Little Rock and got a job as an art director in an advertising agency. 3 years later, started my own business in '73, and I closed it in 2008. So I had that business through that entire time, and did mostly corporate image design. Like I did logos for Harrah's and Dillard's and UAMS and Baptist Medical Center and Tyson's and all that kind of stuff.
Out of curiosity, because now you work with a lot of groups and museums and you share your experiences in Vietnam and your photography and work like that, was that immediately after, or is that something that came after your career, or was that something, you know, some veterans put that part of their life away and then revisit it. Is that how, or was it always with you? I'm just curious.
It was always with me, but I was not, and I was diagnosed with PTSD. One of the hardest things that we did, we would go in and we would just show up and we'd be with them 2 or 3 days, and then we would fly out on a helicopter while they were sitting there looking at us like, you son of, you know, because we could just get in and get out with ease. And if you'll listen to the song they wrote about me.
Yeah, I was going to get to that later. Go ahead and tell us about that, if you will.
Well, there is a veterans outreach group. They started out as Operation Song, and their motto was bringing them home one song at a time. And what they would do is we would sit down with them, and they said, okay, they said, we got 3 hours, tell us your story. And of course, it was going to be military and, you know, what the skeletons in your closet were, you know, regardless of what. But they would listen to you, and as you talk, they would begin to write a song. And that they did. My most intimate fears were kind of exposed during that song. One of them was the words say, didn't belong, just tagged along, didn't fit in, wasn't one of them. They were fighting to keep each other alive. I was a 1LT with a Nikon 35. And it was really hard to engage with those guys and well, that's just leave it at that for any number of reasons. And so that was one of the things that was hard, very hard. Another verse says, something about the troops after a firefight dug in for another long night while we flew out with the wounded and dead and fought with guilt in a warm, dry bed. That's one of the verses that you hear, and those are things that got to me way back then when I was diagnosed with PTSD, and then still bother me today.
Did you find that process of doing the song helpful for you?
Yeah, it was.
Was Steve Dean, was he involved with that project?
Steve Dean wrote the words.
Yeah, he is, for those who don't know, he is a Nashville songwriter, written for many stars. And I think his group now is Freedom Sing. And they actually are coming here in October to film, or to work with another group of veterans to continue that process. So in the past, I know it's helped a lot of veterans. So thank you for sharing that with us. So, because your work to me is very important as a historical note, because you took these photographs or photographic evidence, historic photos that help tell a story. And I'm sure you feel that way, right?
Absolutely.
That you helped capture, and because to me, these photographs tell a story.
Yeah. I think for Jim Guy and I both, this is a really important validation of who we were and what we did back in those days, and still who we are. I mean, I don't know about Jim Guy, I'm sure it's the same way, but we really do identify with this body of work, and sometimes, I can remember exactly where I was and what it was like and everything with every one of these photographs. Every one of them has a story that's as long or longer than the Hovercraft. Every one of them has a story.
Well, we certainly appreciate the support you and both former Governor Tucker of giving the museum, your stories, your artifacts, your photographs that you've let us display. You also, I should tell our viewers that you are a commissioner on the board of this museum, and that's another way that you serve and help us out, and we do appreciate that. And I thank you for coming and talking about your experience in Vietnam and about the photographs we have in the gallery. Before we leave, is there anything you would like to share or talk about?
No, I think that pretty well covers it. It's just the fact that, I feel really blessed having this up here and appreciate it, and serving a little bit of to help bridge the gap between the perception and the reality of that war. We specifically didn't put any blood and guts in here. It would not have been appropriate, and it's the type of thing, I don't have any of that stuff in my collection. I got rid of it all.
But as you have said, there was more to the blood and guts, and that you photographed that, and you told that story, and we tell that story as well.
Yeah, everybody has their own take on that story, and another picture of it is not necessary.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.